In this section, we are going to look at an iterative solution to the vowels problem. Now, this iterative solution will be pretty darn straightforward. So we're going to create a counter variable at the top. We'll initialize it with a default value of 0. We will then iterate through all the characters inside of our string. If a given character is a vowel, we will then increment the counter. And at the very end of the function, we will return that counter. So not that bad. Let's first start off by creating the counter variable. So I'll say let count starts off as 0, and then we will iterate through our string. So we'll say for let char of, and one thing that I want to point out here, the directions didn't really indicate if we wanted to consider capital vowels or not. I think that it's entirely safe to assume that we want to include capital vowels in our vowel counting here. So we'll make sure that we lowercase the string right before we iterate through it. So we'll say string to lowercase. And then we'll put some logic inside of here to decide if we're working with a vowel. And then afterwards, we will return count. Okay, so now the real thing that we want to care about here, the real question is, how are we going to check to see if we are working with a vowel? Well, you might be thinking, hey, let's put down a bunch of if statements. If char is equal to A, or if char is equal to E, and so on. Well, we could definitely do that, but that leads to some pretty nasty looking code with all these if statements put together. So I want to show you a little helper method that is included with all strings and all arrays as well that's going to dramatically simplify this. So we'll look at a very quick example of it. Over here at my code editor, I'm going to create a string. Let's call it simply word. And I'll give it the content hello there. Now, a method that this string has is called include. So I can call word.include, and then I'll pass in some substring that I want to see if it is included in this string right here. So maybe O. What do we get from that? Includes, not include, includes. There we go. So word.includes, we pass in O, and yep, there's an O in there, so we get back true. And then we could do something like capital F. That's not in there. We could do a substring like so. So LO, yep, that's in hello right there. So essentially, using this includes method right here will go a long way towards helping us very elegantly figure out whether or not a given char right here is a vowel or not. So right above our for loop, we will make a string that is going to contain all the different vowels that we want to consider. So I can say const. Ideally, I would really want to call this thing vowels, but the function is already called vowels. So maybe I'll call this like, checker. I don't know, totally making it up. And I'll make this a string. So A-E-I-O-U, like so. Now inside the for loop, we can say if checker dot includes char, then counter plus plus, like so. So if the character that we are looking at is included in this string right here, then we're going to increment the counter. We'll iterate through all of our different characters and then eventually return it. Now, one thing I want to point out here is that using a string in this fashion right here is kind of misleading. It's not really the most clear thing in the world to any future developer who looks at this. They might look at this and say, oh, is the order of characters here really important? So even though we can use a string of characters to use this includes method, I would probably recommend that instead we should use an array as the kind of root comparison thing. So arrays also have this includes helper method on it as well. Let's see an example of what that would look like. It'd be something like A, B, C, C, there we go. And then we would want to see if C is included in the word array. And yes, it is. So if we use an array like this, I think that life just becomes a little bit more clear for future engineers who are working on this problem right here. So maybe A, E, I, O, and U, like so. In addition, this would also allow us to put in like discrete substrings if we ever wanted to, or kind of multi-character strings. Like if I ever wanted to, for some crazy reason, look for ABCs, well, I could put that into this array. I could not very easily do this same thing with only a single big bulk string. So just one thing to keep in mind as well. That's the kind of thing that interviewers want to see you having consideration of, to be honest. So even though it might seem like this is overkill discussion for a function checking to see if we have vowels, honestly, it's kind of a good discussion point to have during an interview. All right, last thing we have to do is make sure we're passing our tests here. Let's check the terminal. And it looks like we are failing here. Counter is not defined. My mistake. I'm incrementing counter right here. It should be simply count. And back over here, we're now passing our tests. Very good. Okay, so that's one possible solution. Now there is another solution that is much more condensed than this right here. So let's take a break and we'll check out that alternate solution in the next section.